Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to Semaphore Uncut, a podcast for developers about building great products. In this new episode, Darko, the podcast host, welcomes Michael Feathers, Chief Architect of Globant, renowned software expert, and author. Michael shares insights on onboarding teams, scaling software development, and integrating AI. I hope you enjoy this new episode. Now let's dive in.
So today with us, we have Michael Feathers. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Can you just go ahead and give a brief introduction of yourself?
Currently, I'm the Chief Architect of Globant. I'm also the Director of R7K Research and Conveyance, and on the advisory board of CodeScene, tool developer. And I spend a lot of time basically digging into hard problems.
Can you maybe give us what are you focusing on right now? What are some of the topics that you're interested in?
What I've been working on recently is something called Patterns of Systems Renewal. And what it is it's really guidance for basically onboarding people into systems in a way. A thing that I've seen over and over again is cases where you have a team that needs to go and take over a code base, right? And they know nothing about it. How do they gather the knowledge to be able to go and actually understand it well, and then be able to go and sort of like operate the code and make additions to it and things like this. So this thing of going and gaining rapid understanding and making the code habitable is it's been like an outstanding problem within the industry. And the cool thing about that is that, it's kind of like a great segue into, what are the things you can do to just basically make development better in the context of a system that you need to maintain understanding in, because quite often understanding tends to like disappear over time in systems.
We have recently launched a CI/CD learning tool which shortcuts into everything you need to know to level up your CI/CD process and increase your productivity. Also, to ensure that all our customers get the best CI/CD guidance, we have improved our sign-up process. From now on, everyone who's considering using Semaphore will get personalized CI/CD expert guidance from day one. Our engineers have more than 10 years of experience, so you'll surely be in good hands. Check it out on our website, semaphoreCI.com.
As you're working on that, and that's quite a hard problem, what are how have you defined goals, and in what format and medium are you thinking about?
Well, right now we have, there's like a white paper that should be coming out within a couple of weeks that goes and gives like a bit of an overview. So in terms of format, I've given one talk about this in Hungary at a meetup, but really it's a set of patterns. So it'll be kind of like a textual basis, just kind of like text written about things that you can do. One of the interesting things that we're kind of developing is this practice. It's a mapping practice. And it's something we call responsibility indices. And it's a way of going and looking at systems, not as like a set of things, like a set of classes or services and stuff like that, but as a set of responsibilities, and then figuring out, where do those responsibilities like reside in different parts of the system, and whether it's a good thing that the responsibility is spread out in a certain way or not. And once you have this map based on responsibilities, then you can kind of use it to go and sort of outline, different things that you need to do or ways you should interact with the system.
How do you see these problems being maybe different or actually very similar between teams of maybe 30, 50 or 100 people versus, or maybe engineering organizations of that size versus some of the very big one and a complex one?
I think scale really does make a difference, and it's kind of funny because like in the early days of Agile, it was kind of designed as a process for teams of about 6 people. And there's things you can do when you're a very small, focused team that are really kind of hard to do when you're part of a large embedded tangle of dependencies. Like if you have a big product, there's lots of ways that you have to go and interact that are a bit different. And it's interesting because I think the stuff that's basically come out recently, like team topologies, is like a great way of going and understanding this dynamic, because one of the things that they kind of focus on is something called stream-aligned teams, which is almost like how can we get back that experience of having a small autonomous team and having that work well within the context of a larger project. Yeah, scale really does matter with these things. As organizations get bigger, quite often there's a bit more bureaucracy that needs to be dealt with. The way that the organization beyond engineering is organized quite often impacts the engineering organization. And you end up having quite often cultural constraints that are kind of tough to deal with.
Can you maybe single out some of the topologies and team sizes that you were the happiest with?
Well, I tend to love being in small teams, right? Just because it seems like there's very few impediments and you just you're able to react quickly to the market and do the things you need to do, right? I used to have this little mantra, scaling is failing, in a way, right? It is true that within the economic and market context that, most people work in, you do need to grow in order to go and actually sort of maintain, the life of your organization and projects and products and stuff like that. So if you can basically make larger communities where everybody knows each other, the environment inside that community can basically be much more dynamic. You can basically create small teams, and then sort of like kill them off and then create other small teams. People can be very dynamic about how they actually sort of like team up to do things. And I've always found that kind of fascinating, is like to really have the social relationships within like this smaller community where you can just organize yourself to basically fit the work. And if you find that it's kind of veering off to the side of what you really want, you organize yourself, dynamically.
There is a book, Managing People, or Managing Humans, it's called. So when I was reading that book, I was like very surprised that the total team size of that iOS team in the maybe even first 2 years was like around 100 people or even less. I tend to always think that, some of those teams might be, huge, and then it comes as a huge surprise.
Things tend to go better when you have smaller teams, generally speaking, right? So there's the old thing of Fred Brooks made the observation, like if you add people to a late team, it makes it later. And then there's like this entire line of thought that goes to basically like the number of communication paths between n people is n squared. So as n grows, n squared is going to grow much faster, and then it's going to be unreasonable to go and sort of like, basically add more and more people. The amount of work or the quality of the work that can be done by a small team doesn't really go in. It doesn't scale with the team, right? It depends on the people. It depends upon what their capabilities are and their energy and their alignment and all these other things. You can have a very small group of capable people do lots and lots of interesting things.
As you said, many businesses are, forced to grow very fast. Then that reflects on us, because once a company triples the size of a team in a year, we can feel as a vendor that they're in some kind of distress when it comes in the quality of the test suite, in the speed of a pipeline, in terms of, some hints for the engineering, leaders and, team managers of such teams. Any hints that you can give how to keep the situation still, under control and not to go crazy?
I think it really comes down to, more than anything else, understanding the dynamics of these things and understanding what happens when you add people to a system, right? And that, essentially there's like this period of acclimation and learning, and then also kind of like generating the structures that are needed to go and have a large group of people work efficiently with each other, right? And it's not easy stuff at all, right? I mean, I think what's really going on with this is sort of people reaching for the easy fix, but it's not even really a fix, right? So there are a lot of things that are really simple solutions, but then you discover through hard experience that they don't quite work. And then if you're dealing with somebody who doesn't quite have that understanding, it's tough, because then you have to be the person that says no. So I think it's a matter of going and spreading the knowledge around the industry, and not just the development teams. A lot of them basically have this intuition about this, but also, venture capitalists, funding sources, stuff along these lines, to understand that that's the dynamic. And, it's funny, there's also this thing culturally too. It looks like something's very important when it has a lot of people, right? But it's smoke and mirrors, I think, to a strong degree.
There was a lot of talk now, the AI and all of that, of like a possibility of so many teams becoming smaller. If you're focusing on this concrete topic of the team size and so on, what do you think? What kind of impact this generation of the code in this latest form that we have through the AI can have impact on the size of the teams and so on?
The way things look right now, it's kind of like there's a lot of cases where basically AI can do a little bit of the legwork and fill in the details when we're working on something, but there's also the cases where it just sort of hallucinates and creates things that don't quite work, right? So we're still learning how to use this technology well. And the thing I keep saying is that, essentially it's kind of like QA just became much more important, right? It's kind of like, you can't just go and say, hey, this thing generated code for me and it's good. Now everything goes back to actually reviewing the code, writing tests for the code, interacting with the system in order to go and understand, that it really is doing what it's supposed to do. So I think there are some ways in which things can win quickly, but this is going to be a thing where we basically, as we start to utilize these tools, it looks like we're going to get a lot of things done much quicker. But one thing I do tend to know about the software development industry is that things keep on getting more complex because people always want more than what we can do, right? So even if it's like you get this thing where you have like this thing which helps us go and generate pieces of applications very quickly, people are going to go and say, yeah, that's like old news. That's the way things looked in 2020. We want something which has the capabilities of, say, your competitor, for instance. So I think human desire for features and for capability always outstrips the technology that we have. And I think that's going to remain true in the future, right? So you might be able to go and sort of like be able to go and cut back and deliver quickly, in the very early days of this, but, it's just like it's going to be a small advantage for a short piece of time.
No, when you start building an app and you don't write any tests and all of that, your velocity is like just great and everything works amazingly well. And you are getting some success and you are scaling your team. You're not going to be sustain that velocity unless you have really a test suite, and all the other elements of good software design that are going to support you in the long run. So
I'm glad you're mentioning this, because one thing to say about AI is that everybody's kind of like saying, hey, let me go and describe in English what I want and have it generate code for me. One of the things that I do is I often teach techniques for going and testing existing code and stuff like this. And so there's exercises I use when I'm doing some training. And a while back, what I did is I took just the unit tests for some of the exercises and basically asked, ChatGPT to go and actually just write the code that would satisfy the tests. And did a reasonably good job. There was a couple of things I needed to go and change and stuff like this. But I think test-first development, or test-driven development in the context of AI is going to be extremely powerful, because it allows us to go and actually create the hard scaffolding to kind of like rein in its tendency to hallucinate a bit, right? If you're specifying with tests exactly what you need and you can execute those tests, then it can generate whatever it wants, and you can find out whether it really satisfies things and whether it's the right way to go and keep things maintainable over time. So I think TDD is becoming much more important in this, in the context of these tools. The thing I'm noticing with the AI stuff is it's kind of like at a certain point it has to just basically fill in the details, and sometimes it gets the details wrong, and we know that's a problem. But that's almost like a parallel to the situation we have in all development, where it's like somebody wants a feature and then a person has to fill in the details, and that's usually the programmers, the developers, right? And still to this day where you have trouble with that, right? So I think it's the step where you fill in the details that's something that is always going to require a lot more energy to go and understand that we do that correctly. People have a need, and then it's kind of like when actually code is created, whether it's generated or we generate it ourselves.
One area where we had a retreat like last week, and that was the opportunity to just play a bit with ChatGPT and similar tools, and we asked it to design maybe just a wild idea that we have for a feature or an app, and give some architectural proposals there. And I don't know what's your experience, but in that area that seems to be, as you were putting it, hallucinating. The complexity of that seems to be much, much higher compared to the complexity of the code and the specific domain language.
The way these systems work by going predicting the next token, there's a little bit of randomness that's injected, because it's sort of like necessary to go and sort of like make responses that kind of flow and are a bit more creative. But that thing of injecting randomness also is the root of the hallucination problem, where things just kind of go off a bit. So it's kind of like you can try to eliminate that, but you also eliminate what gives it value as well.
We have recently launched a CI/CD learning tool which shortcuts into everything you need to know to level up your CI/CD process and increase your productivity. Also, to ensure that all our customers get the best CI/CD guidance, we have improved our sign-up process. From now on, everyone who's considering using Semaphore will get personalized CI/CD expert guidance from day one. Our engineers have more than 10 years of experience, so you'll surely be in good hands. Check it out on our website, semaphoreCI.com.
Connected to a topic that I was mentioning previously about fast-growing teams and so on. Have you seen some success in failures in that pattern of architecture that was great and very sustainable for a team of 50 people? Now for a team of like 250 people or more, they tend to hate it and they want to change the architecture just to fit the team, and all the social contracts and so on. So any piece of advice in that realm or thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough problem. I think really what it comes down to is how much modularity there is in the system already, right? And I think one thing that's kind of interesting is it's important to recognize that this isn't just a limitation of teams. It's kind of like when you look at a piece of code, right? We all know that having a method that's 500 lines is ridiculous. It just makes it hard to understand. So keeping things small and that they fit within our mental context is important. Keeping teams small so they basically are able to go and have their own context is very important also. So we should be paying attention all the time as we're developing to this question, like what is it? At what point does this basically grow beyond human understanding? When does it grow beyond team understanding? And at those moments when things start to slow down a little bit, we should be looking at, okay, where's the modularity boundary we want to have here? What are the separate concerns? Can we create a new team that goes and deals with this particular concern over here, right? It's important not to fall into the trap of doing like complete like functional decomposition with this. We want to, as much as possible, make these things as independent as possible. And that usually depends on, requires us to use like domain-driven design and stuff like this to figure out domains that can be active knowledge areas that a group of people knows that basically sort of, deals with things. So I guess the main thing with this is kind of like to recognize that anything as it grows is going to have to break into pieces. Okay. And if we know that from the very beginning, then even if we don't break things into pieces right away, we should know that when we basically get 10 more people, we're going to have to go and figure out where those fracture planes are in the system that enable that particular thing. I think in cases where this doesn't happen, it's just because people just assume we've got this massive system, and it's kind of like as we add more people, we make it more massive, but they aren't thinking about the places where the internal modularity should be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. I like that term. Those fractures are going to form organically as teams grow, and how it's going to be cut into smaller pieces.
One thing I noticed from early in my career, at least with the Agile stuff, is meeting some people in the early Agile community who were kind of like, they were very, very deep systems thinkers and very strong observers. So there was always this thing of like, when something becomes a little bit painful, you need to be aware of that pain so you can actually go and say, oh, well, how can I actually adjust things, either in the people realm or in the technical realm, to make this easier over time. Quite often people just sort of like, they encounter pain and they never investigate and they never ask what would actually solve the pain in a way that keeps things sustainable. I think just asking that question as you grow things is an important thing as well. The pain is information in software development, right? And I think that's an attitude that's a good one to cultivate.
If someone would want to kind of institutionalize that practice of like stepping back, understanding the pain points and so on, do you think it should be more of like an ad hoc? Everyone should be able to raise a hand and say, I have identified this pain, which is, in this part of the system or this team, or there is maybe a more systematic approach that you have seen that maybe works better? Or
I think to the degree that the awareness is spread, it's very important. I think the other thing which is very important is having people who kind of been there in a way. It's kind of like, our industry is notorious for going and sort of like getting people fresh out of college and basically sort of like giving them a task and having them run with things. But I think there's some things you only start to see after like 5 or 10 years and stuff like that. And so having experienced people who are able to go and sort of like help convey that mindset and help people see the things to look for is pretty important. It does seem that quite often having technical founders in an organization helps a bit with this, provided they have a decent amount of experience themselves in these contexts. So yeah, there's that. I think the other thing I'd point to as well is that I mentioned domain-driven design a couple of times, here today. I think that's probably the most mature literature that we have on these interactions between teams and architecture and stuff like that. There's a new book that's coming out by Nick Toon, which is really about the socio-technical realm and how organization and architecture kind of like, work together. I haven't read it yet, but it's in preprint, but it sounds promising. I've seen some of his talks.
Sounds very interesting, yeah. What would you say especially for those, fast-growing companies, what is the ratio of those? Is it like, one engineer with 5-10 years of experience, and then maybe he has, 2 or 3 people that he's, mentoring and guiding, or?
I don't know. That sounds okay. I've never really sort of sat down and thought about that. I've basically seen different situations where they kind of like fall apart or do well. You need the freshness of new vision, which you're often going to get by people coming, straight into the field. But you also basically need people to kind of been there a bit. I think the important thing is for the people that have been there a bit to recognize when a fresh idea comes along, which might go and sort of like make their experience a little bit less consequential, right? Like, okay, yeah, this is a thing and we need to try this out, right? But I think that the hard-won experience is a good thing as long as those people are flexible. And I think that's the key thing, is to basically develop a culture where people with experience basically are networked in a way, the senior people, so that they can actually sort of provide support for each other and figure out how best to go and actually work with people that are new and grow them. It is a funny thing in the industry now that people kind of like go from job to job very quickly, that it's hard to build like a durational culture where you have like, it's kind of like people that have been there for 5-10 years and they understand things and they've been part of the growth of the organization. But that's, having the people there is quite necessary for going and perpetuating the culture in many cases. And cultures that are organized around good engineering practice are really formidable. It's like you mentioned Apple a bit earlier. And it's kind of like, they have a deep culture, and that culture happens through transmission, people working with each other. And you can't go beyond the ratio too far. If you have too many people that basically are not part of that culture joining at once, then the culture falls apart. So you have to go and sort of like pay attention to, I'm going to use the word temperature again, pay attention to the temperatures. Like, are we growing so fast that we're going to basically basically lose the engineering culture that we've developed so far. And that should be a question that's front and center whenever you're basically going and looking at scaling issues.
In our culture at this point in time of like switching jobs too quickly, we have seen that it can be like a huge disservice to those professionals. You need a year essentially if it's something of a decent complexity and an impact to develop it, and then it needs to mature, and then it needs to see the usage and the scale. And if you are moving on before you have seen that piece of the system has really hit the volume and the heaviness of the usage, and you have already left, you don't have essentially a feedback loop about the work that you did.
Yeah, I like that. It's funny because I think as you say that, it makes me think that people are always looking at years of experience, but there should be years of experience with one product, one system, because unless you go through that life cycle, it's kind of like you don't really know. I think one of the things that I used to talk about quite often is kind of like in university education. I always felt you go and you do a project and you hand it in, you do a project and you hand it in, they're all disconnected. That the perfect thing would basically be from the very first programming course that you take, you start a project, and basically to the point where you graduate, you're working on that same project. So you get to encounter all the consequences of all the decisions you made earlier. And then you become aware of your growth, but you also become aware of the consequence of poor decision making. So that's the thing. There's durational experience in a system is, I think, probably a decent metric to go and use when we're basically trying to go and sort of like deal with maturity issues, I guess. Engineering maturity.
Absolutely. I do have to say that one of our main metrics when we are reviewing CVs is like, is someone able to stay, with the same, software project, same company for at least 3+ years.
Yeah. And I don't know where the sweet spot is either, but I think it's also important to basically sort of move around at a certain point and basically go and encounter extremely different systems. One of the things that's very frustrating as a consultant is quite often you work with developers and it's kind of like they try to argue with you of like, well, that doesn't work. And it's kind of like, well, how do you know it doesn't work? It's like, well, I've been here for 15 years and we've never done things that way. And it works when we do it this other way. It doesn't work when we do it that way. And I say, well, I just visited a team the other week and they've been working 10, 15 years doing the thing that you say doesn't work. What do you think about that? Right. So it's, it's easy to sometimes overlearn things a bit. And so having a couple of like jumps in your career to wildly different areas of experience is good, but also having a durational experience.
And you did touch upon a topic I wanted to ask next, and that's for you to give us like a glimpse into R7K and, also maybe what you can speak about the role that you have right now as a chief architect. So
Globant, I basically am chief architect. It's not really that I'm doing architecture. I just really want to, in picking a title, kind of like emphasize the importance of architecture. But in my role with that, I'm basically working with people and we're kind of like developing practice internally and stuff along those lines. The other thing, R7K, is really just like my own one-person consulting and training company.
Is there potentially a workshop or a conference that we can announce?
Keep a lookout for Patterns of System Renewal because we should be releasing that through Globant pretty soon.
Michael, it was great talking to you, exploring many interesting topics.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
What a great conversation. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Make sure to subscribe to Semaphore Uncut on your podcast player of choice so that you don't miss our new episodes. And stay tuned.